So I wanted to thank here at the library, Julia Ray Hadenfield and Heather Camino, as well as Mickey Porta, who helped organize the exhibit downstairs and this whole program. It's really wonderful to be connected to the library and to build this community within this context. So my name is Torrance York. I'm a photographer and I have the privilege of showing my work downstairs in the Lightburn Gallery. The exhibit is here until early September, and it's called Semaphore, A Journey Through Parkinson. And in the work, I'm examining the shift in my perspective after being diagnosed. So in conjunction with this show, the library invited Fayga Brisman Taylor and Lynn Hagerbrant to speak with us today about Parkinson's research. And they are both with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I have some comments about each of them to introduce them. Fayga Taylor Brisman is Senior Associate Director of Advancement at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. Fayga develops and implements strategies to engage the broader community in Michael J. Fox Foundation's mission to speed a cure, helping ensure that the foundation raises sufficient dollars to fund its ambitious research agenda. Fayga graduated from Thomas Edison University with a bachelor's in education. She earned a master's in library and information sciences from Pratt Institute and a certificate in philanthropy from Wurzweiler School of Social Work at Yeshiva University. She's been at the Michael J. Fox Foundation since 2019, and she was the first person that I met at the foundation, and a very friendly face. Lynn Hagerbrant is co-chair of the Michael J. Fox Foundation Patient Council and co-founder and chairman of the board of the nonprofit Parkinson's Body and Mind, who also helped sponsor my exhibit downstairs. Parkinson's Body and Mind grew out of the Shakers Anonymous support group that Lynn co-founded with Jeff Bouchin. PD Body and Mind works to give people with Parkinson's everything they need to live their best lives, medically, emotionally, socially, their body and mind. They meet this mission with exercise and wellness programs grounded in positive psychology, peer-led support groups, and a speaker series featuring leaders in PD treatment and research. A nurse with experience in cardiac and medical surgical critical care units, Lynn has also worked in the pharmaceutical industry as a teaching hospital representative. She was diagnosed with PD in 2010 and cares for her mother, who is also living with Parkinson's. And I have to share that in my own experience with Parkinson's, meeting Lynn was a turning point when I began to tame the alarming fear that my diagnosis had imposed. Through the Shakers Anonymous support group, I found community and access to more information. And I followed Lynn's example of committing to an optimistic view, a perspective focused on things we can do to slow the progression of our Parkinson's instead of the problems we now face. Literally, the flyer that my doctor gave me about the support group said, Parkinson's Support Group for Optimists. So I want to thank Lynn and Fayga so much for being here today.
So just very quickly to synopsize who I am, what I do. Fayga Brisman Taylor. Yes, louder.
Yes, please.
Okay.
You don't have microphones on.
No, but I'll do try to project.
Sound.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thanks for letting me
Thank
know. So I'm Fayga Brisman Taylor, and my job as a Senior Associate Director of Advancement basically means that I speak to people like you. I speak to community members, I speak to donors, and I talk to them about the great work that we're doing, hopefully in a way that makes it accessible, that makes it easy to understand, and that brings a lot of hope. And I'll let Lynn describe what she does for the foundation as well.
So I have the honor and privilege of being involved with Michael J. Fox Patient Council. I've been part of the Patient Council since 2015. It's really amazing because we get debriefed and updated about the latest research, and we help Michael J. Fox with their wonderful endeavors to really basically help find a cure, and in the meantime help find improved treatments. And it's really a fabulous organization.
All right, I'm gonna get right into it. I'd like to start off all of my presentations with a quote from our founder, Michael J. Fox. And he said, "Our challenges do not define us, our actions do." And I like to talk about this when I'm in events in person, because you have already done a positive action by showing up here today. And hopefully you will continue these actions with involvement with the foundation, involvement with the Parkinson's community. And we're here to tell you more about how and why we can do this. So already, kudos to you. Your actions are what are defining you right now. A bit of background about the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Our mission is to not only find a cure for Parkinson's disease, it's also to find better treatments for people who are living with Parkinson's disease today. It was founded by Michael J. Fox, whom I already mentioned. He was a very well-known actor, and he had a diagnosis of Parkinson's when he was only 29 years old. And, you know, at first he was told, you've got 10 years to work. And here he is over 30 years later. And the incredible strides, you know, when he decided to take this positive action and create the foundation, have really changed the face of Parkinson's for good. We have raised over $2 billion in research to date. That's more than any government in the world. We have over 2,000 projects that have been sponsored. We are what I call egalitarian in our funding, meaning 40% of our funding is for projects outside of the United States. We want a cure. We don't care where it comes from. 88 cents of every dollar goes directly to research on average. And just in 2023, we had over 100,000 individual donors. So we see that people are really responding to what we do. Now, our vision of a world without Parkinson's disease has a few key objectives. As I mentioned, better treatments for Parkinson's disease. You know, our ultimate goal is a cure. But how can we make your lives right now easier? We're constantly trying to understand the biology, why symptoms are happening the way that they're happening, and how we can treat progressively, maybe even stop it. We're also looking to perfect clinical trials for Parkinson's disease. They need to be faster. We're hoping to incorporate some of the things that Lynn will be talking about, really expediting a lot of those results. And we're also looking for better Parkinson's policies, something that I'll be talking about a little bit later on. You know, not only are we funding things, we're also advocating for the community in so many different ways. One of the things that I just like to give people a roadmap for, especially as Lynn talks about what she does, is how do we decide what to fund? When there's an idea in the brain of a researcher or a scientist, you know, how do they initially get funded? Very often it's through the NIH, the National Institute of Health. And say they're given, you know, 5 or 6 years worth of initial funding. Sometimes that is just not enough time or enough money to prove a concept. Now, this was kind of colloquially described by scientists as the graveyard period. After that first 5 or 6 years, if you didn't get a project to get to where it needed to be, it would kind of fail. We decided, you know what, there are so many great projects that just aren't happening because of that lack of funding. So very often what we'll do is, rather than fund something that we call the discovery period, we'll fund that next step. If you've had a discovery period, something looks good, and we just think you need a bit of tweaking, a bit of time, a bit of money, we'll come in and we will help with that particular project. We find that our money goes further that way. We also have connections to pharmaceutical industries, big, you know, biotech companies, which we will use to introduce these projects when they need a bigger influx of money that we can offer. You know, $2 billion sounds like a lot, but I always tell people, whatever medicine you have in your medicine cabinet costs on average about $1 billion to get there. So we are constantly trying to find ways to make sure that our money goes further. And that includes introductions when results look really good to companies that have deeper pockets than we do. So when we talk about clinical trials, that's usually when you read an article, something about phase 1 or phase 2. That means it's out of that preclinical stage and it's now being tested in human beings. So phase 1 is just where they really kind of test something for safety, just to make sure that their drug or idea isn't going to harm the population in any way. Phase 2 is really where they get people involved and they try and get a better idea. Is this drug actually targeting what we want? And then when you read articles and you talk about phase 3, that means there's already been a lot of rigorous insight into this project. And that final phase is to see, is this drug doing what we need it to do ultimately in a safe and effective way? So I just like people to kind of have that in mind as roadmap when we talk about the different phases of clinical trials as we go through the presentation. And lastly, I want to talk about proof positive that this approach to our science is working. And you can see it here. This is a timeline of all of the medications that have been approved for Parkinson's disease. Now, for 46 years, there were 10 treatments available for Parkinson's. The gold standard is something that we still take, that levodopa, carbidopa, or Sinemet. Since the Michael J. Fox Foundation has come along, in the past 19 years, there have been 29 new treatments. If somebody has Parkinson's disease, there are now over 40 options for different treatments that you can pursue to help your symptoms and to help your journey. Most of that is largely due to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. We consider this a big point of pride because it shows that the business model that I just described to you is working. And hopefully together we can continue to see that success. I'm now going to turn it over to Lynn to get a little bit more in depth about some of the research that's currently going on at the foundation.
Well, first I want to start off by saying that research is very important to me, especially for Parkinson's body and mind members and support group members. If you have Parkinson's and you're having a neurodegenerative disease, it provides so much significant hope to basically look into what's the research that's going on, because it puts a bright spot in our lives. I mean, I was also told by a physician that I had 10 good years ahead of me, and I'm now entering the year 14, and I want to go back to that doctor and say, don't say that to somebody else, because you know what? And with research, I really think that if we take care of ourselves, that we basically will be ready for the breakthroughs that will occur. For example, I just want to throw out here before I get started. Right now, there's no disease-modifying treatment for Parkinson's, but there is one. What is that disease-modifying treatment? Does any of you know? Exercise. So exercise actually increases dopamine. It's one of the most significant treatments to help pull back the progression of Parkinson's. Basically, that's where we put our efforts into as far as Parkinson's body and mind, being peer-led to focus and encourage others to exercise. Let's get into the research. I like to call the researchers, if we're getting into this, the Navy SEALs of Parkinson's. So, I look at every researcher I meet with Parkinson's that works with Parkinson's, and I thank them personally for all their hard work. So another breaking news that basically, because of Michael J. Fox, is the biomarker breakthrough. So up to this point, we did not have a biomarker. Why is a biomarker important? Biomarker is important because up to this point, testing for Parkinson's was subjective. It was clinical signs, and basically that was how a physician would tell if you had Parkinson's. That is actually an issue, because with research, you need something more objective. And with a biomarker, which is basically been discovered through the cerebral spinal fluid, we're able to see the alpha-synuclein. It's called the alpha-synuclein seeding amplification assay. And now we're able to see the misfolded alpha-synuclein proteins, which I think is better to confirm PD biologically, and also for research to really see what's making a difference with research. So it's huge, and this just basically was a breakthrough that occurred in 2023. But because of this, it involves a spinal tap. So basically what Michael J. Fox is working on is basically creating a way to measure the misfolded proteins by like a blood draw or a urine sample or something like that, because not a spinal tap is a big deal, and there's a lot of fear surrounding that, and it's very invasive. Well, not very invasive, but it's something that it would be easier if it was a blood draw or something like that. So, and then making a drug, it also, as I was mentioning before, it really will help to basically, really hone in what's making a difference with Parkinson's. What is this clinical test making a difference in basically with having this biomarker, and discovering is also will help shape and faster clinical trial. Another thing that's really new with related to biomarkers is there's more patient involvement. People with Parkinson's, I hate to say patient, but people with Parkinson's involvement, where basically there's some researchers who have never met anybody with Parkinson's. They don't exactly understand the different varied symptoms of somebody. That has become new and groundbreaking. Many years ago, researchers never ever really interfaced with people with Parkinson's. And Michael J. Fox provides that format to basically, where many of us, talk and get interviewed by researchers as far as what's bothering us. And it's really interesting because I've been in that situation, and it's like they're surprised that some of the non-motor symptoms that you don't see bother me more than some of the motor symptoms. So when you think of Parkinson's, many people think it's just motor symptoms, but there's a whole long list of non-motor symptoms that can actually get in the way. The other way that Michael J. Fox is studying how to measure misfolded proteins would be through a nasal swab or skin biopsy. Right now, to use mostly for research and hopefully in the future for patient care. And in addition to the biomarker too, which is very significant, is by the time somebody exhibits symptoms of Parkinson's, such as a classic tremor or stiffness or so forth, 80% or greater loss of dopamine producing cells have been lost. So it'd be great to basically back that up, to basically capture those who are at risk and to see those that basically are not manifesting symptoms, but are showing sign or according to the biomarker, and they're able to discover whether this person is developing Parkinson's. Why is that important? Because basically Michael J. Fox is looking into treatments that help not only hold back the progression or but also to prevent, like a vaccine, to prevent the onset of Parkinson's, which would be extraordinary.
I'm just gonna say, should a nasal swab be a rudimentary tool in an annual exam? If you're telling me it's something that could be a precursor to someone who's long diagnosed, people will report that they had not known they had Parkinson's for years and years and years, but there was similar traits that could never be diagnosed.
That's exactly, you brought up a good point. That's exactly what's gonna happen in the future.
What's a nasal swab gonna call?
It's gonna be like a colonoscopy, but not as uncomfortable.
After COVID, we're all used to nasal.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it would be great, and sometimes, you may think like there's a part, somebody may say, well, why would I wanna know? But, there's lifestyle changes that you can make, there's treatments that will be coming down the pipe. Not only that, doing research on somebody who is basically testing positive and is not manifesting symptoms would be a great candidate for clinical trials and studies. But there's so much to report on this that I hope you have all afternoon to hear about.
And one other thing too, for those care partners, or even if they're not here to say to them when you get home or whatever, clinical trials are a wonderful opportunity to speak with learn more about what's, and the care partner, if you're driving him or her there anyway, they need control, and it's a no-brainer. Because most clinical studies, if they fail, it's usually because they don't have enough subjects.
Yeah, and it's important, it's really important to participate in clinical trials. We're not gonna get anywhere if we don't participate. So I find it's like my job to participate as much as I can and to spread the word about that, yes.
Gene therapy has become very, very large over the
Yes.
last 2 decades.
Yeah,
And when one went for gene therapy testing or gene testing, there were approximately 10 major genes that they were able to focus in on. Then the number a couple of years ago went up to 17 plus more, and now they've obviously been able to identify other genes that are somewhat, I hate the word defective, but not 100% neutral. Is there any type of gene testing that is done to identify whether you are a carrier of a gene that might be prone to a diagnosis of Parkinson's?
go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, genes are a huge topic of conversation, and you're hitting the nail on the head. The first thing that I like to tell people who are genetic carriers is that having a gene for Parkinson's does not mean you will have a diagnosis of Parkinson's. What it generally means is you might have higher risk of developing Parkinson's as compared to the general population who does not carry that gene. So that's just something I like to reassure people about, to begin with when we talk about looking at genetic markers for Parkinson's.
Well, at this point in time, is there a gene that's identified, like the BRCA genes for breast cancer? Is there a gene that is salient to perhaps being prone to?
Yes.
Parkinson's?
There are a few. There are two main ones that we are studying in depth, but as you mentioned, there are more. The two that are that we see the most are genes called the LRRK2 gene. Are you talking about that?
Yeah, a little bit,
Okay, the LRRK2, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but also the GBA gene. Those are the two that we see the most, and we're studying them extensively. We have a couple of clinical trials that are going on specifically with both of those genes. And that's, I'll just tell you an anecdotal story of why. But unlike BRCA, where you have a very high likelihood of going on to get cancer at some point, neither of those genes mean that you have an extraordinarily high likelihood of getting Parkinson's disease. In fact, they give you about a 30% greater chance of getting Parkinson's disease at some point in your life rather than the general population. So those genes are a clue and they are important. You are at greater risk if you're a carrier, but by no means is it a sentence to a certain diagnosis in your life. We are studying them because I'll just take a step back. Alpha-synuclein, has everybody in this room heard the term alpha-synuclein before? Okay, well, how did we discover? Okay, alpha-synuclein, so when people talk about Parkinson's disease, they usually hear about dopamine. Is dopamine something you're familiar with? We know the symptoms of Parkinson's start when there's a loss of dopamine. But at the Michael J. Fox Foundation and beyond, we took a step back. What's happening with the dopamine? Why is dopamine not working as well as it does for people with Parkinson's as within the general population? We have identified the culprit as something called alpha-synuclein. It is a misfolded protein within the body. Everyone has alpha-synuclein, but in people with Parkinson's disease, it's not flowing through the cell the same way that it normally does. It folds up into aggregations, and we believe that causes a toxic environment for dopamine, and that's what leads to the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Well, how did we discover alpha-synuclein? How did we get to this conclusion that it might be what's causing toxicity to dopamine? Alpha-synuclein is a protein, but it also expresses itself as a gene. A little over 25 years ago, there was one family that lived in Europe where it was the only instance seen in the world. Every member of that family would go on to develop Parkinson's disease. So what did we do? We studied that family. We took a look at their DNA and we discovered, lo and behold, they had a mutation on their synuclein gene. That gave us a clue. Well, if synuclein is going awry in this one family and they're all getting Parkinson's disease, what does synuclein look like in all other people with Parkinson's disease? And that really gave us this huge insight into something that we believe can modify the face of the disease. So we believe by studying these genes, which is why we're so interested in people with genetic carriers that might make them more susceptible to Parkinson's diagnosis in the future, we can come on to a big breakthrough like that. So we studied the population of people who have these genetic markers that, again, will give them higher likelihood than just a general person in the population to get Parkinson's disease, but by no means is that, a definitive diagnosis that you will get Parkinson's at some point in your life.
How recently has testing for the LRRK2 and the GBA been part of a genetic panel?
They've been part of a genetic panel for over 10, probably close to 15 years now, and they're easily accessible. You can get them at your doctor's office, or you could get results on 23andMe, or any number of basic genetic panels will test you for those now.
It's a low percentage.
It's a low percentage.
Yeah.
It's mostly affects people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, North African Berbers.
Will you be available in this program for a couple of follow-up questions?
Yeah, absolutely, happy to answer.
Thank you.
All right, anyway, I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question for?
Yes, since you mentioned dopamine, I was curious to know I'm interested in understanding how the relationship between Parkinson's and dopamine might be related to other conditions and dopamine. So for example, dopamine deficiency or difficulty processing it can be tied to attention deficit disorder or possibly other mood disorders. To what extent does the research speak to any kind of correlation or causation?
Like other conditions that affect dopamine.
Exactly.
So dopamine Dopamine works in a lot of different ways. And there are a number of different diagnoses or sometimes like mood disorders that are associated with dopamine. But when it comes to neurological disorders, we've actually found that, prior to maybe previous thought that sort of laid the blame with dopamine all the time, these other associated conditions neurologically are actually more associated with alpha-synuclein. We actually have this whole category called synucleinopathies. Sometimes people call them like Parkinsonisms. So dopamine is, definitely, part of the puzzle, but when it comes to other neurological diagnoses, we've certainly found that synuclein pumping in different parts of the brain is what will actually give you different diagnoses.
I just want to make sure I understood, so.
Yeah.
Dopamine plays a role in the expression of Parkinson's, but it sounds like the underlying cause has more to do with this, synuclein pumping.
We believe that's true in over 95% of people with Parkinson's.
And as a
Yeah.
result, there's no reason to think that dopamine-related deficiencies in someone who has Parkinson's is related to mood disorders, ADHD, or other disorders that have issues with dopamine.
It will be related to mood, just because dopamine is what makes us all happy, it's what happens. I know with specific in people who have Parkinson's, diagnoses or treatments for depression and for anxiety can often be high because their dopamine system's been compromised. It'll lead to more issues than just movement. So yes, in specific with mood disorders, you will see a correlation. And I'll just say, in terms of treatment for those sorts of mood-associated symptoms of Parkinson's, because we do believe that compromised dopamine goes hand in hand with those symptoms, you do need treatments that generally won't work with the dopaminergic system, which is like what most people will take across the board when they don't have Parkinson's to help ease those symptoms. So there are things available that work with your serotonin system to try and really compromise for that weakened dopamine system. So there are treatments people can pursue if they see that they have those concurrent mood disorders, because that is actually a symptom of dopamine loss.
It's helpful, so dopamine loss in someone with Parkinson's cause some of the same challenges as someone who has a mood disorder without Parkinson's. But just because someone has a mood disorder or low dopamine or whatever you want to say, doesn't mean they're going to get Parkinson's.
Yeah, and generally, when we talk about like Parkinson's symptoms, people will talk about like cognition issues that go along with it, but it might not be like an ADHD diagnosis specifically. But there are just certain brain chemistry always needs to be fine-tuned. So that's why we have movement disorder specialists really get to the bottom of that. And there are options, and there's so much more than there has been before. So happy to help with any questions on that too.
Yeah, no, it's okay, it's good.
Okay.
But the biomarker basically is a biological test with 93% accuracy. So it is really, it's nice to have this, and it's been very exciting about this. And Fayga, thank you for explaining about alpha-synuclein, because I was going to get into it, because many people probably don't even know what alpha-synuclein is. And what I like to explain to people to make it more understandable, because when you actually sit in a scientist discussion about Parkinson's research, it sounds like a different language, but I like to say like alpha-synuclein treatments is like treatments for your hair and your brain. So it kind of, straightens out all the misfolded proteins, and so I think that have a little bit of humor to that. Anyway, so scientists are honing in on how to use this this biomarker to basically, help to make faster and better and cheaper treatment, clinical trials to help get better medications and so forth towards Parkinson's. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. The biological era, which I think this is the most exciting type part of this all of these slides, is basically looking at the fact that the biological era, and looking at the fact that basically, I think for a long time, researchers were just looking for a treatment and a cure for Parkinson's, but now they're backing up and looking at the biology, earlier intervention and potential prevention. It's actually there's for the first time where Michael J. Fox is looking for a prevention, which is very exciting. So they're calling it the MJFF Path to Prevention, TTP platform trial, which is really to test for the first time potentially preventive therapeutics for PD. The leverage of using an infrastructure of PPMI, which is something I'll get into later, which helps to save money and time. And over a dozen pharmaceutical companies are really into getting involved with this. So it's scheduled to launch later this year or next year, which is very exciting. The PPMI is a Parkinson's progression marker initiative. And basically it's collect people who have PD and also people who controls people with PD and people at risk, and they basically have studied them. It's a longitudinal study, which I will get into a little bit later, which is really kind of helping to further along the research of Parkinson's. So these are the therapies that are basically being studied to slow or stop the progression. So you bring up genetic targets, GBA, LRRK2, and so forth. Underlying biology, there's ASAP, which is basically a worldwide group of scientists to basically get together to look at to collaborate and to share data, which is another thing that Michael J. Fox does. If they basically fund research, Michael J. Fox asks researchers to basically not hide or hide the results for their own purposes, but to also share with other researchers, kind of like as a toolkit to basically speed along the clinical trials and the results of that, which is really it really makes a big I think that makes a big difference with research. These are some of the therapies that are basically out there that are due to basically hit the market, but they're in phase 3 now. Okay, this is important. What will help us move faster? We can discover other ones. I mean, there's MC14. For example, there's other biomarkers. There's charting the disease progression. There's designing clinical trials, which I spoke about. Early intervention, prevention of PD, testing the impact of new therapies. What also is happening besides the biology is there's subtypes of Parkinson's. So what they've discovered is there's different presentations. There's tremor dominant. There are people that have Parkinson's that do not. So basically they've been able to categorize the different types of Parkinson's, which I think is basically to make a big difference in research. Because I've actually discussed with researchers that there may be a treatment that may help one subtype but not another. And basically up to this point, without a biomarker, everybody's been lumped into the same pool. So that's going to make this is what I wanted to get into is PPMI has been very successful as far as for research. It is it was launched in 2020. And basically it's a longitudinal study where they follow people with Parkinson's and control with people who don't have Parkinson's and really kind of see how the disease progresses and really try to track that as far as getting the data set and sharing that information with other researchers. And I found it very interesting to see that there's 2,500 data downloads a day.
Last time I checked, there was over 14 million downloads cumulative.
That is huge.
I just think there could be these researchers using this data to solve it, find a cure. That's just out there somewhere we don't even know. So it's really exciting.
Very exciting. So and then it's also exciting to know that, basically Cinemat's been around for 60 years, as Fayga mentioned before. And it doesn't basically, it's basically like treating the symptoms, not basically helping as far as holding it back. So we do need new treatments. And I know that there's a lot of excitement in our support group about the subcutaneous pump, which delivers the IV dopamine and it keeps the blood, so it prevents the off periods where it basically happens a lot with oral medication where you have the huge swings of basically coming off and having more symptoms and not keeping that steady, keeping the symptoms at bay. So that's going to be kind of like an insulin pump as a diabetic, but this will be very beneficial for those people with Parkinson's that have trouble with their symptoms.
Where's that in trials?
That's phase 3.
There's actually one already available. on the market, but they're hoping to get one, the one that's currently on trial, it's in phase 3. And, they're hoping that will be more effective, but if you're interested, there is one already on the market.
Is there a clinical trial for that up at IMD in New Haven?
I just wanted to go back.
Yeah, we can go back, they actually have the company, you had it on a previous slide, sorry, it's this one, it's, Neuroderm, the last one listed on this slide. So I'm not sure where Neuroderm's actually conducting that trial.
Just,
Yeah, I know, sorry.
there's so much to say that, I didn't want to miss anything. So the other thing too, I wanted to say that about understanding the individual subtypes of PD is, basically is they have a staging system in addition to this, which has been published recently in Lancet Neurology, which accounts for PD risk diagnosis and functional impairment. The staging system is important, going back to the biology, but basically this helps to basically know where, so that there's a more biological way to basically know where people are in the course of Parkinson's for treatment. Up to this particular point, it's been more a physical subjective test, such as, we go like this and, like this and then tremor, where there is something a little bit more science-based, which is going to be really help basically for establishing treatment for Parkinson's. And then also I wanted to get into ASAP, which was here too, which is a wonderful organization, which is basically international. It stands for Alliance Science Against PD Initiative. It's a collaborative, as I mentioned before, it's a collaborative resource generator, data sharing and accessibility. And it helps to leverage resources and speed towards it, treatments and a cure. The fact that this is an international program is really significant. There's, not much research and not many foundations like Michael J. Fox really look into that type of thing. And I wanted to tell you a quick story. So I was in the meeting for the patient council, and there was a representative from ASAP, which was very impressive and just wonderful. And what they're doing as far as basically collaborating. And they said there's a few countries and they don't have representation. And I had the honor to meet one of the princesses from Jordan at a ping pong for Parkinson's. And her uncle had Parkinson's. I thought she was like an administrative assistant. Come to find out she was a princess. Anyway, so she invited me out to dinner, and this was like one of the highlights. It's a silver lining of having Parkinson's. When would I ever have a chance to go out to dinner with the princess from Jordan? But I did. And he said that one of the countries that they don't have representation from is Jordan. I got that. I actually had the honor and privilege of connecting them with the Princess of Jordan, so they're now in Jordan. So I thought that would be a fun story. That was, so here we are.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, quick question on one of your slides, the tools that could detect the alpha nuclein and dopamine levels. Are those tools currently being used and available to a neurologist who's a movement disorder specialist?
You can go ahead. So, yes, we've been able to measure dopamine in the living brain for a while. There's something called a DAT scan, and very often people, when they're looking at a possible Parkinson's diagnosis, their neurologist will order a DAT scan. It's just sort of a way of saying, well, I think you have Parkinson's. The DAT scan really reflects dopamine depletion, so this is a more conclusive diagnosis.
DAT scan?
DAT. And then the other one, alpha-synuclein, actually, until now, until we found it in PPMI, the seeding amplification assay, we only saw it in autopsy tissue. We were never able to measure alpha-synuclein in a living body. So this was just a giant breakthrough for us, which was really exciting. So hopefully the seeding amplification assay, which as Lynn mentioned, it's invasive now, but we're working on so many ways to just make it more palatable and incorporate it into a regular doctor's visit. Our plan is, together with this staging paper that we wrote, we can measure whether or not your treatments for progression are working. We can see whether or not in real time a treatment is working to lessen those alpha-synuclein clumps. So that's something that's still in the works, but we can finally see alpha-synuclein in the living body with this seeding amplification assay. Not generally readily available. There is a commercially available test called SYN1, but that just tells you if you have alpha-synuclein or if you don't have it. It won't tell you how how much you have. But again, the seeding amplification assay will be really helpful for that, and we're hoping to make it more commercially available, no problem.
And then I want to talk for a few minutes about stem cell therapy. We had Claire Henchcliffe talking to the group about a month ago, I guess it was. And I wanted to explain to all of you the significance of, because of what Michael J. Fox has done, and we're just kind of like speeding along for improved treatments and everything. And I'm going to explain a little bit about this. And Claire, the researcher, Dr. Henchcliffe, who is on the West Coast, has been devoting her lifetime and energy into stem cell therapies for Parkinson's. And she apparently, she was showing like great excitement about, how this is going into phase 2, which is very significant because stem cell therapies about a decade ago failed significantly. And so the fact that now they're kind of showing great promise with stem cell, there was actually a reaction I want all of you to share with all of you where a couple of people broke down into tears. And it was because of feeling that energy of excitement that where, somebody with Parkinson's can easily feel discouraged. Witnessing that, I realized the power of sharing research, in a group like this and with others with PD. And, I just wanted to share a little bit about stem. It wasn't in the slide, but I just wanted to share a little bit about stem cell because it is making great progress. There's a company called Blue Rock Therapeutics, and it's leading the way with efforts to replace the natural brain cells, lots of PD, with dopamine-producing neurons engineered from pluripotent stem cells, which are cells that are basically reprogrammed to be dopaminergic cells, which is really cool that they're able to do that. And Michael J. Fox, in some phase 2. And also wanted to share with you that Michael J. Fox awarded, which I think is fascinating, is $3 million to scientists at Arizona State University for a trial to implant dopamine cells into the brains of people with and also with a mutation, a Parkinson mutation. So that basically it was basically a double treatment for people with PD, which is very exciting. And there's over 200 active trials testing different therapies of PD, 16 trials targeting the pathophysiology of alpha-synuclein to PD. And 88 trials, I'm reckoning more right now, around 88 or more in phase 2 and 37 in phase 3. So, it's what, my responsibility as Parkinson's Body and Mind is to basically encourage people with PD and their care partners to participate in clinical trials, because that's when we're going to basically see the significance of research. And not only that, the great news about the ending Parkinson's disease act, which Fayga is going to get into, which is extremely exciting.
Yeah, so thanks. That, first of all, that was wonderful and really informative. And I do want to join Lynn in making a quick plug for clinical trials. In a poll, we found that 88% of people with Parkinson's disease said that they would love to participate in a clinical trial, but only 25% ever do. And so what we've done at the Michael J. Fox Foundation is we've created a tool to make clinical trial participation quicker and easier. It's called the Fox Trial Finder. And you just go online, michaeljfox.org, look up Fox Trial Finder. And it's basically, I jokingly call it like a match.com for clinical trials. You just fill in some information about yourself, and it'll pop up all of the clinical trials that work for you. Most of the clinical trials that are listed, we found out about through grants.gov, but we also have some industry partners. So there are a couple of extra things in there. And I did a quick run on how many trials were in this area. I looked about 50 miles around New York City. There were almost 60 trials that were available. Very possible somebody here or somebody qualifies for some of those. So we can always use some extra participation. So I'm going to make a quick plug for that. There are other ways to get involved, and I'm just going to breeze through this because I want to make sure we still have some time for questions at the end. But we have webinars, we have podcasts, we have a wonderful column called Ask the MD by our on-staff movement disorder specialist, Dr. Rachel Dolan. Go online, educate yourself. We've got basically materials on anything you can think of. And if there's something you thought of that you can't find information on, just let me know. And, you know, you might see it, you might see something up there in a month or two. We're always looking to share more. We also have a grassroots fundraising department called Team Fox. If you want to participate in any sort of athletics, this is just a really wonderful way to fundraise for us because it's underwritten by board members. So 100% of Team Fox fundraising goes directly to research. We have a policy department where we advocate for things. I'm going to jump into that real quick in a bit. And then we also have a tool for community members called the Parkinson's Buddy Network. And it's a social media sort of tool where you go online, you create a profile, and you can really share your experiences with other members of the communities and their care partners, and you can read about their experiences, their mentors, mentees, and just wonderful information. Sometimes they even have community opportunities. Go ahead.
I believe my daughters have hooked up with something too, as children of someone with Parkinson's. Is there some sort of a support group or information group?
On the Parkinson's Buddy Network, there's definitely, there are family member groups, they call them care partner groups or parents groups, things like that. So yeah, there's all sorts of like wonderful ways to connect. I have a profile and I go on there and I love reading about people's, you know, experiences with different treatments or just sharing some anecdotal information. So might be a good thing to explore. And then Lynn sort of gave me a little teaser for this next slide. This is hot off the press news. For the past few years, our policy department has been working on something called the National Plan to End Parkinson's Disease. And you know what? It is exactly what it sounds like. It is a national plan to end Parkinson's disease. I mentioned earlier, we are the greatest funders of Parkinson's research in the world. And you know what? There is so much to do. As much money as comes into the foundation goes out of the foundation, and we are not nearly there yet. We need help. So we have gathered our community and we have petitioned the government and they have agreed to help us in this fight to find a cure. So it's many years and it just passed last week. It is now sitting on the president's desk. And so this is going to bring together all sorts of federal agencies to help continue Parkinson's research in a bigger way. You know, this can't be all of us. It has to be a greater all of us. So we're just so heartened by this. And Lynn, I heard you actually have a personal connection to someone greatly involved, if you want to share real quick.
Which one is that? Oh, Jennifer Wexton, yeah. So we have a women's support group through Parkinson's Body, and Jennifer Wexton is basically a congresswoman and from Virginia, and she's developed Parkinson's, and she's become a champion for this act, and she's, you know, is helping to raise awareness of, you know, how awful it can be to have Parkinson's. I mean, you know, I think also, I'm just gonna speak up, you know, sometimes most of the time you'll see people that don't really show symptoms, like, you know, right now I'm on medication, so I don't really display symptoms. This disease, I mean, there are a lot of people basically that are in isolation and are being discriminated in the workplace, and just, you know, that I'm just so grateful for this act with Michael J. Fox and being involved with this, because I think this is going to be a game changer to help not only to help find improved treatments and ultimately to raise awareness. You know, Torrance, you know, you're fabulous, and just, you know, and what you've done through raising awareness.
And Jennifer's actually the head of the committee, so she'll be putting together a lot of, you know, this is a bipartisan cause. So I'm excited to see who else sort of leads the charge within our national government. And then to bring it down very quickly to state level, there have been a number of different initiatives towards state registries for Parkinson's disease. And what that basically will do is you know, some people are a little hesitant with this because they feel like it might be invasive, but if you register, it really just helps monitor the cost of Parkinson's disease more locally to you, to really help build funding on a more local level. So Connecticut just recently passed some legislation for a Parkinson's state registry. It's awaiting final signatures, but the way that it would work is you could just Google it or go on to your state government website, and you can sign up for the registry. And in that, it will basically help them keep track of the trajectory of Parkinson's disease within your state, and really try and figure out how they can help people navigate Parkinson's better on a statewide level. And then lastly, the most important thing that you can leave with today is take care of yourself. You know, there's no right or wrong way to do that, but Lynn already spoke about exercise. Make sure that you practice self-care. A balanced diet is always great. And we also talk about building the care team. So we have guides on all of those things on our website if you want to read about it in more detail. Otherwise, I could keep talking, but I really want to hear from you. And the last thing that I always say I want to leave people with is, you know, we gave you so much information, but, you know, going back to those positive actions that Michael talked about, you know, all of this is to bring you hope. Parkinson's is changing. It's not the same disease that it was 10 or 15 years ago, and it's going to continue to change. And just, you know, we talk about the research, but it's manifesting in our lives. So just leaving with hope today is really what I want to bring.
We had on June 12th, a boxing program at 11 o'clock. For Boxing for Health and Wellness, which is inspired by Boxing for Parkinson's, and it's with Bo, but it's Bo's gym or something. Bo's it's right across the street and it'll be outside, so we moved by here. And then on July 15th, I'll be talking with a educator, David H. Rose, about Parkinson's creativity and the connection, and exploring that with my HR.
I have a question here from the chat, and just a reminder, we do have 30 people who joined us via Zoom today, which is amazing. Thank you to all of our Zoom attendees. One person just wanted to bring us back to the markers, the genetic markers question, and I think that you answered it, but if you don't mind just giving another minute to, should family members of someone with Parkinson's get tested if they see there are any biomarkers present?
Yeah,
Really,
so
thank you.
the biomarker is more of like the diagnostic tool, but then we also have something called genetic markers or genetic mutations. And I always say that is a very personal question. That's very situational, but it's also a really fair question. Most people with Parkinson's disease, in fact, 90% of people who are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease don't have a genetic marker that we know of right now. It's only about 10% of people living with Parkinson's that do have a known genetic marker. So, you know, that's something, if you want to explore it, or if you see that it occurs in your family very often, that might be something to look at. Something else that I like to talk about is we often see a prevalence of environmental triggers for people with Parkinson's. So sometimes you'll see people within the same family getting a diagnosis of Parkinson's, but they live in the same area and they're exposed to the same sorts of environmental triggers. So you'll see that also. Michael actually, he said that about 7 people who were all working on some of his movies together went on to develop Parkinson's disease. So we see that it's not only genetic factors that we also have to look at. There are environmental factors. We're working on that on the policy level also. But we'll also see clusters of areas where people who live in the same place will go on to develop.
Especially in agricultural areas.
Exactly. Yeah. Some pesticides have associations. Fire pits have associations. So a lot of veterans may go on to receive a diagnosis. Exactly.
What was the last one?
Agent Orange in on that.
Hopefully that was helpful, but if
Thank
somebody
you.
wants to discuss genetic testing and what that might entail, please, my email's right here, feel free to reach out.
Sounds very interesting that when we have genetic testing and your genes may be perfectly fine, still come down.
Yeah, I've been tested twice, I have no genetic links to Parkinson's, but that doesn't mean I don't have it, because my mother has Parkinson's. But it, you know, they may not have discovered the genes that have been identified.
My daughter, who's 38, was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when she was 15 and a half months. And back then they were talking about discovering a gene. And a few years ago, we went to an update, and there's 63 genes now. So they're always discovering new things.
Right.
involved with.
There was a lot of emphasis on hope, which is encouraging. What would you say to someone who identifies as a realist in the sense of like, this is something beyond my control, there is a natural progression, there are stages, and as a result of being a realist is hesitant to reach out to support groups or exercise classes because of the fear of seeing people in a later stage that may or may not relate to their situation, their subset, but that might be discouraging or something like that. So to recap, a realist hesitant to reach out for support, maybe wanting to meet people who have the same subset. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's why we try to keep our group as optimistic as possible. And, you know, my goal as one of the leaders of the program, especially if I'm leading a support group, is I try to make, my goal is to make everybody feel a little bit better when they leave the room than when they came into the room. And I believe that information is power, and it is, I mean, I was also one of those people who was newly diagnosed who didn't want to go to a support group, just wanted, and I also hid my diagnosis for 2. If I had to do all the work, and I wouldn't have done. But, you know, I think that knowledge is power with Parkinson's, and, you know, the fact that we have access to all this information is powerful. But, you know, I do understand the people in different stages of the disease and being a realist, maybe not wanting to expose themselves to a support group or, you know, there'd be some hesitancy about that. But I think for those of us here in the group who are involved with it, I don't think that I would be, it's made me more optimistic and it's made it an empowerment that I wouldn't have had without this group.
Yeah, I mean, in the balance of our support group, because I love the community, but there's also a mentoring opportunity through the Parkinson's Body and Mind. So you could find someone, you know, you could be matched with someone who that person could sort of be your buddy, and that person could be capable in the same way you are.
And the other thing.
Or that person.
Yeah, and the other thing with support groups at Parkinson's Body and Mind, I'm Lynn Hagerbrant, is that we're looking into a young onset group for precisely what you said. And it may not even be where you are in your progression, but it can be where you are in your life. Young people who need to continue to work, who still have children at home, who they need to get through school, have a very different need for support than someone who is older, retired, and an empty nester. So I think support groups can be incredibly helpful, empowering, and especially to keep it positive, but you have to find the one that works for you. And there are, you know, different types, but happy to talk to you later if you want to reach out.
Are there any studies that show that mixed stage support groups are more beneficial, or that it's more helpful for people to be paired buddied with someone in their same stage and subset? I imagine since knowledge is power, it can be helpful to know what to expect at perhaps a later stage or what has helped slow the progression. But optimism is important too. So what do you know about kind of indicators of positive outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that we've always focused, I mean, you know, we termed our group Shakers Anonymous. And so, you know, that kind of doesn't sound depressing, and, you know, kind of like the term itself kind of seems like there's a lot of levity. But I think when we started our support group, we had it at 7 p.m. at night to try to draw the more active person with Parkinson's. But I think over the years I've seen, I think once somebody gets over the hurdle of seeing somebody who's more infirm with Parkinson's, I think that there's mutually beneficial information that's shared. There's wisdom that's shared with somebody who's had Parkinson's or somebody who's, and I've actually witnessed, I get chills talking about it. You know, somebody newly diagnosed who's younger, talking to somebody who's older, where the person who's older is sharing how he was able. So there is some benefit to mixing the groups that you would think may not happen. Allison.
It also depends on your personality and your spouse's personality. We were involved at the very beginning and everything, and my husband went to and freaked him out because everyone there was either in wheelchairs or walk. And this was like 15 years ago when he was first diagnosed. He also has another rare non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when we go to the Zoom support groups with that, I found that I was the only caregiver involved in it. Usually it was just the person. Some people get freaked out. I mean, if you go to something and everyone's complaining about it and you're seeing all these things that people are going through, this is a very positive support group. And on the first Tuesdays of every month at 7 o'clock, we meet at 7 on Zoom. And then we break up into 2 different groups. One is for the caregivers or care partners, and one is for the people with Parkinson. And you can explore without your partner and see if it might be a good form. Call me.
There's also a sentiment that I once received from a social worker, and it really stuck with me. It may be not for anyone else, but what she said was, your song is your song. It's not anyone else's song. You have to realize that you're a unique individual, the symptomology. And my husband and I go to Diane's group in Stamford. It's every Wednesday, and the first Wednesday is caregivers. And when we first started going, I was absolutely, how everyone has a different symptom. Some people are shakers, some people you can see by their faces, but everyone was very warm and very welcoming. And we're blessed to have Diane. So, you know, I keep walking around that. Your song is your song.
I like that.
And it's not anyone else's song. Don't let anyone usurp your song.
And one little thing I wanted to add on, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. You know what's hard is when a person has Parkinson's, but doesn't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if someone's like, I know there's something wrong with him, you know, and then when they finally share it, it's more clear. Rather than someone thinking, I wonder if it's this, if it's that. So it's like, sometimes it's a relief for somebody.
Yeah.
And they may not do it right away.
Reminds me of a quote from Michael. He says, if you've met one person with Parkinson's disease, you've met one person with Parkinson's disease. You know, like, it doesn't make you an expert in all Parkinson's disease because everyone's is just individual. Any other questions?
Curious for the national act that's
Yeah.
about the past, is there any kind of monetary discussion?
Monetary discussion
Yes, in terms of
with the government.
money put into.
Yeah, there is. There's, hopefully there will be a large monetary component to it too. So with the national plan, we've actually taken a leaf out of the book, out of Alzheimer's book. They had a national plan, and Alzheimer's is the most well-funded neurological disease by far. They have many times more government funding, and it was due in large part to their national plan. So we are hoping for something similar. Parkinson's disease is the fastest growing neurological disorder. It definitely affects a lot less people than Alzheimer's, but with, you know, an aging population and everyone thankfully living a lot longer and in good health, this is something we do plan to see more. So yes, there is no committee put together yet. It of course still needs to be signed by the president, but we are hoping it will greatly impact government funding towards the disease, which is great.
Also, like 8 or 10 or 12 years ago, in the previous administration, they announced neurological disorders funding. So I had assumed Parkinson's was covered under that.
We do get funding, but it's not like it pales in comparison to the growth rate and the prevalence.
Anyone else who would like to speak before I another question? I'm interested in hearing more about environmental factors. There's a mention of fire pits, perhaps environmental factors that one might encounter in everyday life here in Fairfield County as opposed to like Agent Orange. Are there others?
Fire
pits in general, fire pits?
People with fire pit exposure, you know, I actually spoke to a firefighters group the other day, and you know, they seem to have like an anecdotal correlation. I haven't seen any data to back that up, but fire pits were mostly like used in war or to burn things, or you know, like those pits that it doesn't mean a backyard barbecue.
You know, to answer your question, there's a Dr. Ray Duffy wrote a book called Ending Parkinson's, Dr. Ray Dorsey, Ending Parkinson's Disease, and he talks about two really big things that affect everybody. Dry cleaners, chemicals in dry cleaning. He said he would live within 2 miles of a dry cleaner because it all leaches into the water. Golf courses from pesticides. Paraquat is one of the worst ones. It is produced in China. banned in China, banned in Brazil, we still use it on our crops here, and it's got a 500 times
So I look at it-
increase and it's put on fruits and vegetables.
I look at it as a lifestyle, it's part of my lifestyle that I work on to start staying as healthy as possible and fighting back the progression. I look at drinking water. I look at what I put on our lawn, I look at, I mean, a lot of the, weed killers are neurotoxins. And so that I focus on trying to eat as much organic foods as possible. Also, there's been research that shows that, due to inflammation, minimizing dairy intake. So I look at all that, excuse me.
Organic.
Weeds are green too. When I took my master gardener course, the first thing was on lawns or turf or whatever they call it. A woman from master gardener. Well, no, it was interesting. She was showing different weeds, and I hadn't used pesticides on or any weed killers on my yard in ages. All right, and because we're on a well. And I remember, the slide would come up. Oh, I have that. That's what it's called. And another weed. Oh, I have that. That's what it's called. And I figured as long as it was green, the guys would come once a week and mow it, and it looked green, and that was fine for me.
But drinking therapy of well water is really looking at, the pesticides.
Filters.
That, getting a good filter is important.
Back to your comment about
Depends, a lot of people say don't walk, take your golf cart, even though walking is good for you, so we put it in water, your hand, but, yeah.
Has there been any correlation between people who are professional golfers or those who are amateurs and hit the links once or twice a week?
That's a good, I haven't seen any data on that, but
So
it
that
would
was
be
some
interesting
roll
to
on
look
the
at.
grass.
Yeah, I mean, golf courses, because they look so beautiful and are so tame, they use those, so that is it, but I've not seen, I don't know if anybody else has, but anything specific to golfers. It is an interesting thing to look into.
And people who work.
Alcohol consumption, and that's interesting, I don't know, I don't think I've done a training on it, I mean, obviously too much alcohol is not good for Parkinson's, but.
Yeah, I haven't seen an association with Parkinson's.
But when I was
Some in terms of,
with your meds.
does it make your symptoms worse or?
Well, when I was first diagnosed by Dr. Kwan, he prescribed wine. So, I mean, part of it was funny, I mean, now, but because when I was doing some public speaking and I said, I get tremors, he said, have a glass of wine, it'll be fine. So it started with wine and it moved to Parmalat.
Just like going back to the song reference, that everybody's song is different, I think, from what I've heard, one thing to keep in mind with alcohol is if someone is struggling with balance and has a high risk of a fall, drinking while seated, then, not having processed that, standing up, it just possibly increases the fall risk. So I think that's worth keeping in mind, even if there isn't a conflict with the medication, ultimately balance is key.
Right. Yeah, you hear a lot about artificial intelligence accelerating. Is that a hope for the future that it will accelerate?
And not only that, mass data, really looking at, there's a woman, there's a scientist on the West Coast, Dr. Laura Mishley. She studies thousands of people. It should be interesting to look it up if you're interested. Her name is Laura Mishley. She's in Portland, Oregon. She studied thousands of people who are doing college, people who are not doing it, not understanding exactly why. And it's interesting that she actually has information about limiting, the takeaways that she spoke to her group was not happening.
Didn't she also say something about chicken?
Yeah.
Like, at least we know that dairy is associated with inflammation.
Yeah, did she say no?
She said
minimize
that-
chicken.
Yeah, she said that the people whose symptoms were reduced were not eating chicken. It wasn't that a particular chicken or
But you
organic or not organic.
that immediately, because I'm part Dutch, and so I love cheese, and so I was like, I mean, and plain cheese just doesn't cut it, I mean, I just hate to say that, but you and I both immediately listened to that, we changed our cheese diet, dairy.
We had a speaker, and I'm forgetting what she said about AI, a woman who talked about clinical trials. They're using AI and it is speeding along their clinical trials. I'm gonna go back, there's a podcast on our website, you're gonna make me go back and listen to it. She said again, because she specifically did address AI, because it was a question from somebody.
Yeah, and then with that mass data, like, you know, our son worked for Epic, which is an electronic medical record company. And I remember talking to Michael J. Fox, some of the key people there about that data that's so important to access you talk about a registry, you know, and how people are doing, and there's a lot of information in that.
There is, and there's actually a new company that's started up, actually it's run by your fellow patient council member, that his entire company is just using AI to study large sets of Parkinson's data and try and find patterns. So that's something he's working on, but AI is something that a lot of researchers who utilize our databases will find. We spoke about how if you accept grant money from the Michael J. Fox Foundation, you have an oath of transparency within your research, so all data is freely accessible. We've collected through PPMI and another online clinical trial we run called Fox Insight, very, very large data sets. So yes, AI can be applied to those, and they already have been. I happen to know a lot of people who are applying AI methodology towards, you know, these vast repositories that are PPMI and trying to glean whatever information they need.
The alpha clumping in the brain, would that be visible on an MRI or a CAT scan?
No, but imaging is something that we are working to do now. Parkinson's is something that's located within the substantia nigra, which is like very inner part of the brain. And we've never been able to find something to bind to those alpha-synuclein clumps so that they would show up on an MRI. But that's actually like the gold standard of biomarker. We would love that if you could actually see alpha-synuclein in the brain. And due to PPMI, we've actually, or rather not PPMI, but an initiative run by the Michael J. Fox Foundation called the Ken Griffin Imaging Competition. There's an associated disease called MSA, multisystem atrophy. Now that has alpha-synuclein clumping, but it's located more on the outer lobes of the brain, so it's easier to see that clumping. So through funding from the foundation, we created this contest for different labs. So we have seen alpha-synuclein in the living brain, but we've only been able to picture it in the outer part of the brain, which is helpful for another diagnosis. So we accidentally very much helped MSA along with their biomarkers. We came up with a biomarker for them. But in the Parkinson's brain, those clumps are just like a little bit too far inside the brain to really get a clear picture of it right now. But we're continuing to work on it, and we'd love to find that.
Biogen is working on PET scans.
There's a few help from Merck and
There's also alpha-synuclein in other parts of the body.
yes,
And a lot of us are donating our brain for when we
Brain
have
registry,
to research for that.
there is. If anyone wants to ask me any personal question or private questions, we can certainly do that.
Thank you so much for having you here, and Torrance for, you know, your wonderful exhibit. If you haven't checked it out, go to the Lightburn Gallery on your way out and look at impactful and beautiful images. And thank you all for coming today.